butter my arse, we have ourselves a raid, people, thank Christ. The Crucible of Storms was up for testing, and we got to see the last boss of this 2-boss raid. As you know, we have tested this in the past, and not impressive. Not impressive at all. It was actually super disappointing, the first boss in here. I was like, oh, what is this? This is no good. No, do not want the first boss, the Restless Cabal. Edgy. The Cabal of 2. Cabal of 2 that don't do much in a dark purple room with the dark purple bosses that do dark purple mechanics that weren't all that interesting to begin with. However, in good news, I'll just talk briefly about this boss before we move on to the main attraction here. They have changed it. It's less purple. It's actually more distinct now. The graphics animations have been turned up on their mechanics so you can see them. Unfortunately, though, at least at the heroic level, which is what we got to test, they have removed some stuff. Like, ads have been removed, and they've also kind of just tweaked a little bits of the fight, which is generally what happens during testing, making the fight slightly less interesting than it was before. So there's some pros. One, it's much easier to see and deal with the fight because you can see what's going on rather clearly. And the opposite side effects of it, they made it a little less interesting in some regards. Either way, it's okay. Not great. A little bit boring. Doesn't really fit in with the cool stuff we've seen in Battle for Dazara lore. So let's move on. So how do we get to the next boss? The floor does drop away. I will point out here, we had massive connection issues dealing with the Restless Cabal, which was the first hour of testing. They even had to extend it by 30 minutes because guilds were just constantly being kicked out. And a theory was put forward is because they're working on the room. Because we had similar issues with Talok because the room's actually an elevator. It might be the case. It might be the case that there are areas in the floor that are causing problems. Hopefully they get that fixed so we don't end up with another storm wall blockade scenario because that also had the same kind of issues. So, fingers crossed. Anyway, we drop down into the floor. Welcome back to Yoxaron. Welcome back to AQ40. Welcome back to being in a cool environment. It is brighter underground than it is above ground. Great, whatever, but it looks very cool. We're inside the Maw of Madness. We are down in there, for any of you who are old school Lovecraftian fans, with all the teeth and the tentacles and the goo and all this kind of stuff. And we're also into the world of trash. So, spoilers, the boss is great. Why this gigantic, enormous, long tunnel full of tedious trash is here blows my goddamn mind, Blizz. No. No. This makes runback so tedious. This trash is so annoying that we only killed it once, and when members of other guilds came on our Discord after we had finished testing and asked, nobody killed this trash a second time. Everybody death-runned it. That's not just because we're on time constraints, because we only get an hour to test the boss. It was purely because this trash is so annoying and there's so much of it. Please, no. I get why they're doing it. This boss has a mechanic which involves picking up relics for a DPS, a healer, and a tank. 3 different relics, and using them. So they're trying to use this trash to go, hey, this is this relic mechanic. Try it out on the trash so you understand how this works. I understand what you're doing. I totally get it. But this trash is just way too much. Luckily, the environment is quite nice, but God's sake, man, when we're certainly going to be working on the mythic version of this fight, which is definitely going to involve a lot of wipes. I can already see this being just tuned out the arse, and I'll explain why later. That nobody's going to do this trash. We all just death-runned it, made sure a healer was soulstoned, so we never, ever had to deal with this trash again, because it is just... It's not hard, it's just a pain in the ass, because there's so goddamn much of it. Anyway, as you can see, as we move towards Unat, 2 U's, apostrophe N-A-T, Unat, the Harbinger of the Void. I've already got my Rasmus poster on the wall ready. Beautifully animated. We got the return of the Cthulhu eyeball, which is now in like 2019 animation. It looks a little suggestive, but it also looks glorious. It looks absolutely fantastic. And a nice big environment in order to deal with Unat, which is a boss that goes through multiple phases. Around about every 30%, it will change to a different phase, but how cool is this fight? So I already mentioned the relics. You'll see them like dotted around at the beginning of the encounter, so you can pick them up as soon as you start the fight, then you can pick them up. These relics, let me just give you a little idea of how they work. So 3 different relics. There's a tank one that puts a shield up, reducing damage taken by 75%. There's also a DPS one, which deals ticking damage, and is the only thing that can kill certain enemies. So anything that drops below 25% health, using the DPS relic will instantly kill them. Also prevents after death mechanics. Okay, something we weren't aware of because we're all dumb and didn't read the tooltip properly, but it prevents after death mechanics. So there are going to be various things in the fight that do something after they die, and that means you can prevent that from happening. So think of it a bit like Hearthstone. So, you know, when a card's destroyed, but it does something after the card's destroyed, so you can prevent that mechanic from happening. And there's a healer one. The healer one's really interesting. It actually debuffs the whole raid, so nobody can be healed, right? Nobody can be healed whatsoever. However, it also means that the ads and the boss cannot be healed as well. So it has this other effect, which is very useful in the fight. So you have to coordinate with the healers deciding we're not going to allow any of you to be healed for a certain period of time in order to deal with something else going on in the fight. So those are the 3 things. Once the relic has been used, it falls to the floor. Okay, so if you use it, you get debuffed, so you can't pick it up again for quite a long time. It falls to the floor, and then it starts generating energy while it's on the floor. You can actually see it in the boss frames. The item cannot be picked up again until it has recharged. So it'll just lie around on the floor until it's recharged. Then you have the choice to pick it up again. So that works the same for all 3 relics. Okay, so what's going on here? Lots and lot going on here. And why I love this fight and why it has redeemed the Crucible of Storms for me. Tons of different ways of tackling this fight. And that's the best thing about progress raiding for me. I love when we get a puzzle to solve and there's multiple solutions, and we have to figure out what's best for our raid, what's best for us and the caliber of our players. You can do multiple very set-in-stone repeating mechanics, which you might use if you're not that comfortable with your raid, you don't trust certain players, you know, you've got some weaker players in there, and you can start really planning and plotting it out. And that might even be what the big guilds do when it comes to the mythic style of this in order to control this environment. Love it when the entire guild is just throwing out ideas and all of them work. Like, all of them make sense. All of them are potential ways we can tackle this encounter. So that's great. Love boss fights like that aren't just, this is how you do it. I hate Dance Dance Revolution fights. And what I mean by that is fights that have to be done in a super, super specific way. Hellier would be a prime example of that. I'm not a big fan of Hellier Mythic because it was just DDR. You just had to do the exact same motions over and over again and pray and hope everybody did it perfectly correctly, and then the boss would just die. This fight is more like very free-for-all, very flowing, very hectic, lots of thinking on the fly from each individual player in order to cope with the mechanics. So what are those mechanics then? First of all, these wonderfully animated eyeballs are going to start, in phase 1, are going to start chewing through the raid by firing giant eye lasers across, and they move in a kind of cross formation, which means that they do intersect at a certain point. Every time you get hit by one of these beams, you get a damage over time, which is a pretty significant dot that's going to affect you. And also, if you happen to hit the second beam, while the dot's still on, that dot will not only refresh, but then stack up to 2 and do significant raid damage. That means you have to look where the eye beams are coming from, try and throw yourself through one, so the dot can tick on you, then reset, then get the second dot later on. Now, that sounds pretty easy because it's a big open space. However, the room is doing this battle royale style thing, where when the boss reaches full energy, it's going to shrink the Eye of the Storm. It's going to shrink the room down, and that makes all of this way more difficult to handle, right? At the same time, they're going to be dropping these Oblivion Spheres, which are pools on the ground, and also some other pools which will linger throughout the fight. If you touch them, some of them do significant damage to you, and there were some bugs where if the terrain wasn't perfectly even, like it didn't visually show, or it looked like you were out of it but you're still in it, so hopefully they'll fix that. But the ones that linger around for the remainder of the fight, if you walk in them, you don't really take much damage, but they do heal the boss. Yeah, they do heal the boss. Now you can see it all coming to tie together. So they do spawn under players, which means you can control them. And as I just said, the room's shrinking. So what you can actually do is say, okay, this portion of the room is going to be useless to us shortly because the room's going to shrink. Let's try and drop pools in this area. But it's not as easy as just like stand out on the edge, because not only are you going to have to keep moving from pools that spawn underneath you, you've also got the eye beams to deal with, and also you've got the ads to deal with as well. So a very interesting tank mechanic here is similar to Yogg-Saron. is we have these guardians, these like immortal guardians that are going to be with us for a very long time. And you can DPS them down, but they can only be killed by the DPS relic. They can only be killed in that manner. So what we have is a cool mechanic where the tank and the guardians need to be separated, otherwise they take way reduced damage. But once the boss, the actual main boss Unat, does its tank ability, so typical, something we've all got used to now, is the boss will do something which makes you swap tanks. Not that interesting, not that fun. However, they've twisted it this time because more and more guardians are going to be spawning throughout the fight, is that once you get hit with this tank ability, you become fixated by all the adds. So you're not going to be struggling to try and pick up all the adds and do some sort of obnoxious tank swap with multiple adds. This time around, once the boss hits you, it'll just automatically cause all the adds to run to that tank, forcing a very simple process of the guy who was tanking the adds just to taunt the boss, because all the adds are going to naturally leave that tank anyway, because he's fixated by the adds, making that much more easy to control in what is a very hectic environment. So I really like that addition of that mechanic. I thought that was super fun. So the whole idea is to DPS down Unat by, I think you get to 70% to get into phase 2, while also managing all of these mechanics that are going on at the same time, and the room ever shrinking. It only causes like 1 or 2 heals to actually really scuff this up, because once you start getting into the smallest area it can go, the room will not disappear. It will get to a very, very small area, but that area is just too small to deal with ever increasing spawns of pools and I-beams coming across, so you can no longer stagger that dot. So it becomes super difficult once the room is really small. It only takes players hitting a couple of these healing pools in order to raise the boss's HP past the point you would have transferred it into the next phase and kind of reset the encounter for phase 2 and got the whole room space left. So I really like that personal play of, one, you're avoiding pools, you're managing I-beams, you're managing DPS on multiple targets, while simultaneously still bearing in mind where you're stood, so you're not leaving pools in the middle, which are going to be a problem later in the fight, and trying to get those out of the encounter. So much going on from all perspectives. So I do want to mention something here which is very important. This raid is supposed to go hand in hand with Battle for Dazar-Alor. Almost impossible to ignore. Well, it is. It's impossible to not know that Battle for Dazar-Alor is already out and this isn't. What they're doing is they're testing this. They dropped our gear to 385 item level for this testing. For some of the players in my guild, that's it's 25 item level difference, if not higher in some cases. The sheer lack of HP present on each individual member of the raid was ridiculously notable. Not only that, but they changed our artifact neck level to 30, which also prevented any of the new Azerite armor, which is widely accessible in the game currently, from working. I couldn't tell you why. So what I will tell you here is the DPS, the healing, the tank mitigation, all of those things, and just general sturdiness of the raid is dramatically lower, because the gear scaling in BFA is ludicrous, which means 25 item levels is enormous, absolutely enormous. And what might happen, and hopefully it won't happen, is this raid could be dead on arrival. What I mean by that is, the loot is interesting. We're going to do a separate video on the loot because they're using affixed loot for the first time in here. All the loot that drops in here has some sort of quirk to it. We'll be looking at that in a separate video. That is available for testing, and I have been testing it. But it's also of the same item level of Battle for Dazar-Alor, and a lot of this loot, without getting into too much detail, isn't that tempting for anybody. Which means that there's going to be very little in the way of upgrades for a lot of people in here. And if they keep it as it is, we might end up going in and just absolutely slaughtering this raid, just because our gear naturally in-game is so much higher than what this content seems to be designed for, at least at the heroic level. That it could be just a raid that nobody's interested in after the first clear. Like, they go, they kill it, and then it's just a waste of time. Like, there's no reason to go there whatsoever. So I hope that doesn't happen, but it is a fear I have right now. It could have also just been a mistake by Blizzard that they didn't alter the scaling, or they're looking at it from the idea that this raid is designed for guilds around 385 item level, but that's not reality. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So one has to really question, exactly what information Blizzard was getting out of this. Like, is it possible at 385? And if it is that really what's going to happen? I don't know. Very strange. Ultimately, we do move into phase 2 here, where the room grows again, and then we start getting those tentacle monsters that you'll have seen at the end of Shrine of the Storm when you go into the darkness phase of the last boss, where if they do a very long cast, but if they get it off, they then heal to full, and you have to manage those. Now, these are the ones that have the on-death mechanics, where they will spawn a ton of small adds, which increasingly become more dangerous. Now, this is where it got really fun for us, because although we didn't know, and I would admit here, we did not know that if we used the DPS relics on the larger adds, that we would not have got the small adds. It was actually fine, because we could use the DPS relic in a different way. It wasn't that we were ignoring it, we just used it in a totally different way. Instead, what we opted to do was just to off-tank them, and obviously blood DKs are a big deal here, because that means you can gather all of these casting, these little casting worm boys. Is that we ended up just off-tanking them, creating a massive pool of small adds, then lining it up with the transition into the next phase, and then just nuking everything down while having the tank shield on top of us, allowing for some really interesting, cool DPS moments. So although we weren't aware of a mechanic which would have prevented something happening, it actually didn't matter, because we lined it up to do something else. And ultimately, using this stuff does cause healing on the boss, which means that you kind of want to do that as less times as possible. Like, you don't want to heal the boss too much by spamming like all these relics all the time. Now, that does bring up the healing one. How did we use that? Well, as I said before, these pools that drop on the floor actually heal the boss. They don't do a great deal of damage to players who walk in them. The punishment for walking in them is that you're healing the boss. And that causes a great deal of difficulty because, as I said, it's a shrinking room that you need to deal with on regular occasions. Now, what you can do here is wait for moments and then call out, okay, we're debuffing everybody. And at that point, everybody clears the room, right? So you can have the raid all spread out and say, right, we're going to debuff you in a few seconds. Now go and clear all the room. And then we can get rid of this debuff and purge that from us so we can actually carry on with the fight. And timing and lining up that way makes the fight much more manageable. So it gave us all these options to deal with, which is why, again, I really enjoyed this fight. I thought this was super fun. Really looking forward to this to do it on live. We did not manage to see Phase 3. We got awfully close. But Phase 3 does apparently go a little bit like Cho'Gall. A little bit of Cho'Gall here, where there's going to be a lot of tentacles spawning and things are going to get real wacky. We did speak to somebody who got into Phase 3, and they said it's just super wacky in that phase. It gets real crazy, and it's looking like it's going to be a hell of a fight. This fight is like what Xavius should have been from Emerald Nightmare. This is what I thought. I thought this is like a really good Xavius. It's a similar setup with the big circular room, and you've got this guy to deal with, but it's considerably more interesting, so much more to manage, so much more individual play to deal with, and has absolutely redeemed the Crucible of Storms for me. So, thanks, Blizz. Good job. I will see you shortly, probably tomorrow or the day after, because we've got a different video to make there, where we will look at this Crucible of Storms loot in practice. All right? In practice. So, thank you very much for listening, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.